came back, her eyes were red. And I asked her mom what happened. She said that. And I said, did anything happen? She said something like that. And I said, has my dad died? She said yes.
My husband call me Inky. Whenever he's coming back, Ink, I will know that my husband is coming back. I miss him a lot. What of the rent? Nobody. My husband, they are alive, but they don't have.
She collected the house. She threw everything down, said, I don't want you in my house. The foundation of the house, you have spoiled it, everything. No, please, can you leave?
After the death of my dad, everything seems as if the world is turned around for us.
All right, welcome back. If you're just joining us, you're right on time for our next conversation. I have you with me, the producer of that documentary, which you just saw, Bolanle Olukanni. Thanks for being here today.
Hey, Ebuka.
Yes, let's start on that note now. What motivated that? Because I mean, people know you for being on TV. You're a presenter on Moments on Ebony Live TV.
Yeah.
You do everything media based. You also own your red carpet show. But this was sort of a surprise for people. Where did that come from?
You know, it's funny because I remember the last time I was on Rubbin Minds. I think it was 2015. Yeah. And you asked me, you're like, oh, what are you planning on doing, you know, in the next year? And I told you I was going to produce a documentary.
Yes.
So I finally did it. I think that I've always been very passionate about finding a way to merge, you know, my passion for helping others and also my passion for creating content and media into one, and producing a documentary about women who are marginalized, not out of their own choosing, but because, you know, life happened, you know, widows, and sharing on some of their stories has been an opportunity that I'm really, really happy.
You know, when you told me then that you were going to produce a documentary, I don't know that this was what I pictured. Was this always what you, was this the plan then?
No, so it wasn't. It's interesting because I remember then in my head, I was just looking for a story that I knew I could connect to.
Okay.
There's a documentary that's infamous. A lot of people, you either love it or hate it, Welcome to Lagos. And I remember I just loved the fact that they were doing something that I felt like wasn't happening in the media space here, telling Nigerian stories. You know, when you think about who we are as people, we're fascinating people, and documentaries do that. They tell people stories. And God's Wives came about because I had started working with the woman a year prior to actually producing this in 2016, December. And, you know, I just realized that I wasn't really using my platform to do anything for anyone. People will say they're inspired by you, but what does that really mean? Like, how has someone's life really changed based on the fact that I have exposure and I have access to other people? So I was really, really excited when I realized that I could use storytelling to tell about people's stories who are really struggling and challenging. Yeah.
I mean, it's a fascinating thing that you decided to do that, because a lot of people, like you said, just talk the talk but not necessarily walk the walk. You know, I mean, it must have taken a lot for you to decide to do this now. But so this is an organization you found?
Yes.
Or were you a part of them?
So it's kind of a complex story. Okay. So, in December, I started working with an NGO called the Self-Worth Organization. And that organization worked with women who are widows. Okay. Now, while I was working with them, you know, she told me that she had the desire to open an empowerment center. And the center would train women on makeup, tailoring, and catering. And I was like, okay, this sounds like a thing we can do, you know, because normally they would have like a Christmas party for them. You know, they would give them rice and oil, but there's a difference between giving someone a gift and then teaching them how to actually make income from themselves. Because when you think about it, a lot of these women lose their husbands, right? And they become the automatic breadwinners. You have 3 to 4 children. And the question is, how are you going to fend for yourselves? Yes, your relatives might help, but are they really going to be able to help you in the long term? Yeah. So, you know, the sister Chinyere, who's the ED of the Self-Worth Organization, wanted to actually open an empowerment center that they would be able to learn a skill that they can actually generate income from. So I was like, okay, that's fine, we can do that. So we opened the Empowerment Center, which is based in Surulere, in Aguda, last year in March. And then during the process of training them, I started hearing about their stories. And while I was, you know, hearing their stories, that's when I decided, okay, you know what, I'm going to produce this documentary. And I named it God's Wives because that's what God calls them. You know, he says that he takes care of the women who are widows and the orphans. And yeah, that's how it kind of all came about together.
Great stuff. How's the journey been? I mean, is there more to come from this? Was this a one-off?
No, so it's definitely been an amazing journey. We have the center in Surulere, which is open, and we're going to be opening another center in Ajegunle. And, you know, this documentary, what it really is an opportunity to let people hear other people's stories and also a fundraiser. So while we did the first screening in Lagos, we raised about 1.3 million. Which is great because now we can move into a larger center in Surulere. Because after our first batch of training, we were able to train 75 women. And these trainings are free. The women come into the center. They don't have to pay for anything. You know, we cover all of the overhead costs and we do everything by ourselves. And, you know, they just have the opportunity to see that their lives don't have to mean nothing just because they've lost a spouse. Because when you think about it, a lot of times in Nigeria, like, as a woman, I'm not married, and I know that people, in so many ways, so many people consider it like you're a half person, right? Then you go from being married, then you lose your spouse. And there's this whole notion, well, what did you have anything to do with it? You know, what are you going to do now? A lot of times, none of them, they can't remarry, specifically because cultural practices and society says, you know, if you remarry, then you won't be able to take your children into the new husband's homes. So I know of one woman who, she was 29, lost her husband at 29, had 4 children, and to this day, she's not remarried. You know, so when I hear about these kind of stories, I'm like, there has to be some way where if, and this is this is shade. If the government is not going to do social services, then we as the people need to do it for each other. Yeah.
Very well done. Well done. That's very impressive. And
thanks, Ebuka.
I want to touch on something that you talked about earlier about documentaries in your journey. Why did you, I mean, like you said, we don't seem to find a lot of these stories being told in Nigeria. Not just about widows, just generally documentaries, properly done ones. So, did you find that it was too hard to do? Why do you find that documentaries are tough to make here?
Oh my gosh, so hard. I shot the documentary twice. The first one, well, that was also because of technical issues, because it was my first time producing, writing, and directing a piece of my own. But I also think that sometimes, you know, when a camera comes in front of a lot of people, we switch personalities. We become these kind of, we project what we think you want the producer to give
against
you.
What is.
Exactly, you know, so maybe instead of being as vulnerable, they're not as vulnerable. And what I really loved about this opportunity was I didn't just go out to the street and pick random people who have never met me to tell their story. You know, I had grown a relationship with these women because I've been working with them in the center. And they were able to be vulnerable and tell me about the hardship of losing their husband. But I also think sometimes in life, you know, when our society can be very hard and living here can be very, very hard. And when you live in a harsh society, nobody really wants to hear serious stories. Every day you face the reality of the reality. And, you know, that's why comedy sells and that's why, you know, fiction sells. But the honest truth is that even in this documentary, even though it's very serious and it's very harsh and, you know, it shows a lot of faces of poverty that we often don't actually hear the stories behind, there is a ray of hope in it, you know. There are women who have children who hope for the best. They want their children to do well and to flourish. And I think through the center, we've been able to really give a lot of people the opportunity for hope. But the thing is, the reason why I actually started talking about it, because I was working with them for a whole year, is because I realized there's only so much I could do by myself. You know, and if I have the ability and access to people like you know, my friends, you know, people at home, we can come together and we can literally pioneer and change the face of what it is that we see in Nigeria. Because the honest truth is, we really just need to stop depending on, you know, the government or certain civil society groups.
All the time,
and we just need to do it for ourselves.
Well done, well done, well done, well done. God's Wives, it's on?
Yes. So God's Wives, so I'm doing a screening, a press tour. So the tour is, next stop is Abuja. And it's probably going to be the 3rd week in January. And then after that, it's going to be on terrestrial TV.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
Can't wait for that. Enough of God's Wives. Let's find out, how are you doing?
I'm fine,
How's Bolanle doing?
I'm always so nervous when Ebuka is going to interview me because I'm like, what is he going to ask me?
But you were here 2 years ago, and it was 3 years ago, and it was great.
You asked me some questions.
But they were good questions.
They were good questions.
Exactly. So how are you doing? How's work? How's life?
It's really, really good. I think I'm at a really happy place. Very content. Very, you know, sometimes, you know, with the work we do, sometimes you have to evolve, and it's hard to kind of sometimes pinpoint and identify where you're going, and sometimes, you know, it can feel like a rat race. But I feel very, you know, paced. I'm taking my time.
I was going to talk about that because